Welcome to Stories TH. In today's story, we uncover the thrilling tale of a woman who rises from the ashes of betrayal and hardship, fighting for her family's future and her own happiness. From a life of struggle to unimaginable wealth, her journey is filled with love, deceit, and triumph. But what happens when everything she has fought for is on the line? Stay tuned to find out. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to Stories TH for more exciting content. Introduction to the characters and setting. Main character, Hannah Bellamy. Hannah Bellamy is a young woman born into a family with very limited means, struggling against the constant weight of financial hardships and societal discrimination. Raised in a small, quiet village nestled in the picturesque but often isolating countryside of England, her life has always been shaped by the rigid societal norms of the area. The village, while beautiful in its own way, is bound by traditional values that dictate the roles of individuals based on their social class. People like Hannah, from a humble background, are frequently looked down upon and treated as inferior, regardless of their talents, education, or potential. Hannah, despite her circumstances, has always shown a sharp mind and a strong sense of independence. Though society often makes her feel inferior, she refuses to let this shape her identity. There is a fire within her that longs for more, a desire to break free from the confines of poverty and the constraints of the small-mindedness surrounding her. She dreams of a life filled with opportunity, one where she is not judged by her background, but instead by her abilities and character. However, this dream often feels unreachable, as the weight of poverty and the challenges of her environment drag her down. The judgment she faces from the community create a sense of isolation, and she frequently feels trapped in a cycle she can't escape. Yet, through it all, Hannah remains resilient. She draws strength from the love and support of her family, especially her mother, and refuses to give up on the possibility of a better future. The challenges she faces are tough, but they also fuel her determination to change her life and the lives of those she loves. Hannah's family. Eleanor, the resilient mother. Hannah's mother, Eleanor, is a pillar of strength in their family. Having lost her husband when Hannah was very young, Eleanor took on the responsibility of raising her children alone. She worked tirelessly, often juggling several jobs at once, to provide the basics for her family: food, shelter, and love. Despite the hardships, Eleanor never showed weakness. Her love for her children was her driving force, and it was evident in the sacrifices she made each day to ensure they had what they needed. Though the family lived in modest circumstances with little more than a roof over their heads and simple meals, Eleanor always instilled in Hannah the values of hard work, integrity, and perseverance. She taught her that no matter how challenging life becomes, one must keep pushing forward. Hannah and Eleanor share a close bond, but it is not without tension. Eleanor, being a mother who has sacrificed so much for her children, has high expectations for Hannah, hoping that she will grow into someone strong and independent. This sometimes creates a strain in their relationship, as Hannah feels the weight of her mother's expectations. But despite the occasional conflict, their love for one another remains unshakable. Eleanor's unwavering support has been a constant source of comfort and strength for Hannah, even in the most difficult of times. The loss of her father left a void in Hannah's heart, one that she still feels deeply. The pain of losing him at such a young age has shaped her view of the world and her determination to make something of herself. However, it is also this loss that drives her to live up to the dreams her father once had for her: a desire to make him proud and to give her family the life they always dreamed of. Supporting character: Edward Harrington and Lucinda. Edward Harrington is an older man in his mid-60s who has spent his life building a vast fortune. As the owner of a large estate, he lives in a grand mansion that is both beautiful and daunting. However, despite the luxury surrounding him, Edward is a deeply lonely man. His wife passed away many years ago, and he has no children of his own. His only living relative is his niece, Lucinda, who lives with him in the mansion, though their relationship is strained. Edward's wealth has provided him with the comforts of life, but it has not brought him happiness. His mansion, though large and filled with the finest things, is an empty place, devoid of warmth and connection. He is a man haunted by loneliness, and the passing years have made him more aware of the emotional void in his life. Though he remains a strong and powerful figure, there is a sadness that he cannot hide. Lucinda, Edward's niece, is a beautiful young woman, but she is far from kind. Raised with a sense of entitlement and privilege, Lucinda views herself as the rightful heir to her uncle's fortune. She is accustomed to getting what she wants and has little regard for the feelings of others. When Hannah arrives at the estate, Lucinda sees her as a threat, a young woman who might steal away the family fortune or disrupt the carefully constructed world Lucinda has come to expect. Her hostility towards Hannah is immediate, and she uses every opportunity to make her feel unwelcome. Edward, however, remains oblivious to Lucinda's schemes, and despite his loneliness, he is unaware of the deeper manipulations taking place under his roof. His naivety allows Lucinda's hostility to go unchecked, and the tension between the two women grows as the story unfolds. The struggles and Hannah's decision. Hannah's fears, feeling trapped by poverty and expectations, 600 words. Hannah had always known the weight of poverty, as it cast a long shadow over every aspect of her life. Each morning, she woke to the sounds of her mother bustling around the small house, preparing for another long day of work, trying to stretch every penny they had. The small, cluttered home she shared with her mother and younger siblings was filled with love, but also with constant reminders of their financial limitations. Hannah often sat by the window, looking out at the world beyond, imagining a life free of the constant pressure to survive. Yet, no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she dreamed, the gap between her aspirations and reality seemed insurmountable. The village where she grew up was unforgiving, and the stark divisions between the rich and the poor were felt in every conversation, every glance exchanged. Hannah was no stranger to judgment. Her status as a poor woman in a society that prized wealth and status meant that she was often looked down upon. She had no illusions about her place in the world. The local people, many of whom had never left the village, were skeptical of anyone who dared to dream of something more. They had their expectations of her to remain humble, to accept her role as someone who would always be at the bottom of the social ladder. But Hannah could never reconcile herself with this fate. She was capable. She was intelligent. She knew she had so much more to offer the world. Yet every effort to climb the ladder seemed futile. Her mother, although loving and supportive, had a similar resignation. She had worked hard all her life, but nothing seemed to change. They were caught in a cycle that seemed impossible to break. Hannah's heart ached for her family, but she knew that without change, their future would remain bleak. The pressure was building, and it became unbearable. What could she do to escape? How could she change her family's destiny? These questions plagued her mind daily. One day, as she sat in the garden, staring at the flowers her mother had carefully tended to, an idea began to form. It was a decision she had never considered before, and yet it felt like the only choice left. Was it right? Was it fair? The fear of what it meant haunted her, but deep down, she knew the answer. Something had to change. She couldn't allow herself to become another casualty of circumstance. She had to take control of her own fate, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. The bold decision, marrying Edward Harrington. The decision hit Hannah like a wave crashing against the shore. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, an opportunity to escape the life she had known. But at what cost? Edward Harrington, the wealthy estate owner, had taken a keen interest in her over the past few months. He was old enough to be her father, yet his charm and the wealth he wielded seemed almost irresistible. He had lived a life of privilege, one that Hannah could never have imagined for herself. And though she had initially rejected the idea, the circumstances made her reconsider. As much as she had longed for a chance to break free from her impoverished life, the thought of marrying a man so much older than herself, with no feelings of genuine love between them, left her feeling conflicted. However, after countless sleepless nights, when the reality of her family's situation pressed down on her like a heavy stone, she realized that this might be the only opportunity to change their lives. Edward had offered her a way to live without the constant worry of how to make ends meet. In his eyes, there was potential for a future where she would no longer have to fight every day to survive. Despite her hesitation, Hannah made up her mind. She couldn't let fear stand in the way of what was best for her family. The thought of her younger siblings, her brother, who dreamed of attending school, and her younger sister, who wanted to become a doctor, kept her awake at night. How could she stand by and watch them suffer just because she was too afraid to act? They deserved more. They deserved a life free from the chains of poverty. Marrying Edward would give them that chance. But it wasn't just her family she was thinking of. For the first time in her life, she wondered if she too might deserve more. She was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for them, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness and personal desires. As she walked into the grand estate for the first time, Hannah couldn't help but feel the weight of her decision. This would be her life now. It was no longer just about her. This was about her family's future. The mansion, with its sprawling gardens and towering walls, seemed like another world entirely. Would she ever feel at home here? Would she be able to adjust to a life of luxury, where she had everything she needed but nothing that truly mattered? Family's opposition, Eleanor's worries. Hannah's decision to marry Edward did not come without resistance. Her mother, Eleanor, had always been her pillar of strength, but this time, the love between them was tinged with concern. Eleanor had seen the world change too many times, and she knew that wealth and security didn't always bring happiness. Though she understood that Hannah felt trapped, she couldn't shake the nagging fear that her daughter was making a grave mistake. "Are you sure, Hannah? This is not a decision you can undo," Eleanor had said, her voice trembling as she sat at the kitchen table, the dim light casting shadows on her worn face. She had seen so many women like Hannah, women who had entered marriages out of necessity, only to find themselves lost in lives they never chose. Eleanor's worry wasn't just about the man Hannah was marrying, but about the toll it would take on her heart. Hannah had always been a dreamer, someone with so much potential. Would she be crushed under the weight of a loveless marriage? Would she lose herself in the process of trying to please everyone around her? It pained Eleanor to think of her daughter, the girl she had raised to believe in her own worth, now facing a life where she might have to compromise everything she had ever wanted. Despite her mother's concerns, Hannah was resolute. She understood her mother's worries, but she had reached a point where she could no longer allow herself to be swayed by doubt. The future of her family depended on this choice. She knew it wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a solution nonetheless. It was her chance to give them a better life, and she wasn't going to let fear or uncertainty stand in her way. "Please, Mama," Hannah had said softly, holding her mother's hands in her own. "I have to do this for all of us. I've thought about it long and hard. This is the only way." Though Eleanor knew she couldn't stop Hannah, her heart ached with the knowledge that her daughter was about to step into a future she couldn't control. The bond between mother and daughter was deep, and it hurt to see that bond tested by such a heavy decision. But Eleanor also understood the gravity of their situation. She had fought for years to keep them afloat, and now it was time for Hannah to fight for something more. She would support her daughter, even if it meant watching her walk down a path that was filled with uncertainty. The wedding and confrontation with Lucinda. The wedding day, a new chapter in Hannah's life. The wedding day arrived with a sense of grandeur and ceremonial elegance that Hannah had never experienced before. The church, bathed in soft candlelight, was filled with an air of anticipation, the ornate pews and stained glass windows adding to the sacred atmosphere. As the bells chimed, signaling the beginning of the ceremony, Hannah stepped forward in her wedding dress, the white fabric flowing behind her like a river of dreams. It was a day she had imagined countless times, but now that it was happening, she felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. She walked down the aisle, her heart racing in her chest, her thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. The soft murmur of the guests around her seemed to fade into the background as she caught sight of Edward standing at the altar, waiting for her. His eyes were filled with a calm that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing inside her. She couldn't help but wonder if she was making the right choice. Was this truly the life she wanted, Or was it just a step towards something she couldn't turn back from? As she reached the altar, Edward's hand extended to her, offering his support, but Hannah hesitated for a moment before taking it. She felt an overwhelming wave of emotion, anxiety, excitement, doubt, yet, beneath it all, there was a quiet certainty. She was embarking on a new chapter of her life, one that held both the promise of a better future for her family and the fear of losing her own identity in the process. When the priest asked if she took Edward as her husband, the words that left her lips felt almost mechanical. "I do." The weight of the vow settled over her like a heavy cloak. She was committing not just to Edward, but to the life that awaited her, one of luxury, yes, but also of emotional isolation and sacrifice. The guests looked on, some with admiration, others with judgment. But all Hannah could focus on was the feeling that her life was slipping away from her control. The path ahead was uncertain, but she had already made her choice. As they were pronounced husband and wife, Edward leaned in to kiss her. The kiss was soft, perfunctory, but it sealed their union in front of the world. Hannah, still reeling from the enormity of the decision, wondered how her life would unfold now that she had taken this irrevocable step. Would she find happiness? Or had she simply traded one form of hardship for another? Lucinda and the confrontation, a hostile welcome. After the wedding ceremony, Hannah was escorted back to Edward's grand estate, a sprawling mansion nestled in the heart of the countryside. As they entered the grandiose home, the atmosphere felt cold, almost unwelcoming. The walls, adorned with rich tapestries and antique furniture, exuded wealth, but Hannah couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. The large, echoing hall seemed to magnify her uncertainty, and the faces of the servants, all polite but distant, added to her sense of alienation. Lucinda, Edward's niece, was the first to greet her upon entering the mansion. Her smile was cold, and her gaze sharp, as if she were already measuring Hannah up, sizing her up for a role she didn't want to play. "Welcome to your new home," Lucinda said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "I'm sure you'll find it quite different from your little cottage." The subtle insult was not lost on Hannah, who struggled to keep her composure. Lucinda's hostility was immediate and palpable. She made no effort to hide her disdain for Hannah, constantly undermining her and throwing subtle jabs at her background. "I do hope you're ready for this," Lucinda continued, her eyes gleaming with a mix of amusement and malice. "It's not as easy as it looks." The venom in her words made it clear that she viewed Hannah's presence as an intrusion into the family's legacy, a legacy Lucinda was determined to protect at all costs. As the days passed, Lucinda's behavior didn't improve. She frequently mocked Hannah's attempts to adapt to the luxurious lifestyle of the mansion, drawing attention to the small, seemingly insignificant details that made Hannah feel more like an outsider. "Oh dear," Lucinda would say with a mocking smile. "You do know that people here don't drink tea from chipped cups, don't you?" Hannah could feel the sting of Lucinda's words each time she spoke, but she refused to let them break her. She kept her head high, reminding herself that she was doing this for her family's future, no matter how hostile the environment was. Lucinda's attempts to belittle her only made Hannah more determined, but the constant barrage of criticism and judgment wore her down, leaving her feeling isolated and unsure of herself. The mansion, which should have been a symbol of her new life, felt more like a gilded cage. No matter how much she tried to fit in, it seemed as though she would always be an outsider in the eyes of Edward's family. The relationship with Edward, a cold, distant union. Life at the mansion was everything Hannah had dreamed of in terms of material comfort, but it fell short in the one area that mattered most: love. Edward, despite his wealth and charm, remained emotionally distant, and their marriage seemed more like a formality than a partnership. The man she had married, who had seemed so kind and promising in the early days of their courtship, was a stranger in many ways. Edward, for all his affluence, was emotionally unavailable. He spent most of his time in his study, lost in paperwork or reminiscing about days gone by. When he did speak to Hannah, it was with politeness, but there was no warmth behind his words. Their conversations, if they could be called that, were sparse and formal, revolving around household matters or the occasional comment on the weather. At night, when they retired to their separate rooms, Hannah would lie awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts running in circles. Was this truly the life she had hoped for? Was this what it meant to marry a man with such wealth? She had traded one form of loneliness for another, and the silence between her and Edward felt more oppressive than the noise of her past life. The mansion, with all its grandeur, only highlighted the void between them. The emotional distance between them began to weigh heavily on Hannah. She had hoped that, with time, she and Edward would grow closer, that they might find some form of connection. But as the days turned into weeks and then months, she realized that the love she had longed for was not something Edward could offer. His heart seemed closed off, and the challenges of new life. Life in the estate, a cold luxury. Hannah had never imagined that wealth could feel so suffocating. The grandeur of Edward's estate, with its vast rooms, fine furniture, and intricate tapestries, should have been a dream come true. Yet for Hannah, it was nothing more than a gilded cage. The cold, imposing walls of the mansion seemed to close in on her, making her feel smaller and more insignificant with each passing day. Despite the luxurious surroundings, there was an emptiness that no amount of gold or fine silk could fill. The once vibrant dreams she had held of a better life now seemed distant, out of reach in this grand, sterile environment. The mansion, with its opulent halls and towering ceilings, felt like a mausoleum. There was no warmth in its stone floors, no love in its grand, empty rooms. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the faint echoes of footsteps or the occasional murmur of distant servants. It was a house filled with material wealth, yet it lacked the one thing Hannah had always cherished: warmth. No matter how many beautiful paintings adorned the walls or how soft the carpets beneath her feet, it all seemed meaningless. She longed for the familiar hum of life that had once filled her small home back in the village, the chatter, the laughter, the shared moments of family life. As Hannah wandered through the mansion's halls, she found herself more isolated than ever. She had once imagined that wealth would bring freedom, but it had only trapped her in a world where she felt invisible. The house had no soul, and neither did the people in it. She had expected the estate to be a place where she could escape her old life, but now she realized that it was nothing more than a constant reminder of what she had left behind: the love of her family, the simplicity of her old life, and most of all, the sense of belonging. Each night, as she lay in her large, lonely bed, the emptiness of the mansion surrounded her like a cold blanket. It was as if the very walls of the house rejected her, reminding her that no amount of wealth could fill the void inside her heart. She longed for the comfort of home, the small things that made life bearable. But here, in this mansion, surrounded by riches, she felt more alone than ever. Loneliness, facing hostility and coldness. Hannah's isolation was further compounded by the hostility she faced from Lucinda and the cold indifference from Edward. From the very first day, Lucinda made her presence felt with sharp words and subtle jabs. The young woman had never shown an ounce of kindness, instead viewing Hannah's arrival as a threat to her place in the family. Lucinda's disdain for her was palpable, and she made no effort to hide her animosity. Every word, every glance from Lucinda seemed designed to remind Hannah that she was not welcome here. The mansion, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a prison, and Lucinda was the jailer. Edward, for his part, was no better. Although he had invited Hannah into his life, it quickly became apparent that his expectations of their marriage were vastly different from hers. His indifference only fueled Hannah's feelings of isolation. The man she had married for security and stability barely acknowledged her existence. Their conversations, when they happened, were terse and unemotional. Hannah's desire for a genuine connection, for warmth and affection, was met with silence and detachment. Edward's inability or unwillingness to nurture any kind of emotional bond left her feeling even more alone. As the days passed, Hannah sank deeper into a feeling of loneliness. She had exchanged one kind of life for another, but it wasn't the kind of freedom she had imagined. Instead of the comfort of her family's love, she was now surrounded by wealth and opulence, but no genuine connection. The mansion, filled with luxury and fine things, could not provide the companionship she yearned for. She found herself spending long hours in the gardens, walking aimlessly through the estate, trying to find some solace in nature. But no matter where she went, the same coldness seemed to follow her. Hannah often found herself longing for the days when she had been a part of something, when her family had been close, even though they had little. Now, surrounded by grandeur and isolation, she felt like a shadow of the woman she once was. Her thoughts turned inward, questioning whether she had made the right decision. She had hoped that marrying Edward would bring her happiness, but instead, it only deepened her sense of loss. Family discord, the limitations of power. Edward's wealth and power were supposed to shield Hannah from the judgments of others, but instead, they seemed to amplify the divide between her and the family. The mansion, though grand, was not a place of refuge for Hannah, it was a battleground. Lucinda's hostility was a constant presence, and though Edward was her husband, he seemed incapable of intervening. His power, the very thing that had lured her into this marriage, appeared ineffective when it came to protecting her from the cruelty of his family. Despite his wealth and influence, Edward was powerless to shield Hannah from the toxic environment that Lucinda had created. The young woman's unrelenting insults and cold treatment made Hannah feel like an outsider, someone who didn't belong in this world of privilege and entitlement. Edward's position as the head of the household should have given him the ability to control the dynamics within the mansion, but he remained distant and passive, avoiding conflict rather than confronting it. The more Hannah tried to fit into the family, the more she felt like a stranger. Lucinda's behavior was unchallenged, and Edward's lack of action left her feeling abandoned. It was as though she were trapped in a house full of people who had no intention of accepting her. Her struggles to fit in only seemed to make matters worse, and her attempts to reach out to Edward were met with indifference. Despite his power, Edward's inability to address the discord in his home left Hannah feeling helpless and invisible. In the end, Hannah realized that the power Edward wielded in the outside world could not protect her from the emotional turmoil she faced in his own home. His wealth had brought her security, but it had not brought her peace. The mansion, though beautiful, was a fortress of emotional isolation, and the people within it had no intention of offering her the warmth and love she so desperately needed. Perseverance and determination of Hannah. Perseverance, adapting to a life of luxury without love. Despite the constant challenges she faced in her new life, Hannah was determined not to give up. The mansion, with its sprawling gardens and grandiose architecture, offered luxuries she had never imagined, but it was devoid of warmth, affection, and a true sense of belonging. For weeks, she fought against the feelings of loneliness that seeped into every corner of her existence. Though she had left behind a life of poverty and struggle, the emotional toll of her new environment made her question whether it was worth it. Yet, despite the emotional void, she refused to let despair take over her. At first, she tried to immerse herself in the splendor around her luxury dinners, fine clothes, and the endless supply of servants who catered to her every need. But none of it filled the emptiness she felt inside. She had hoped that her new life would bring her happiness, but she quickly realized that material wealth could not replace the human connection she craved. The lavish mansion, despite its beauty, felt hollow. The first months of her marriage had been the hardest. She found herself alone in the massive home, walking through vast rooms that echoed with silence. She tried to reach out to Edward, hoping for some sign of affection, but his indifference pushed her further into isolation. Her interactions with Lucinda, who constantly belittled her, only deepened her sense of being an outsider. Yet, even as her frustration grew, Hannah's determination to make her new life work remained steadfast. She refused to let herself be consumed by loneliness or the cruelty of those around her. With each passing day, Hannah learned to adapt. She embraced the responsibilities that came with her new life, throwing herself into managing the estate's affairs, attending to the details of Edward's world, and trying to make herself useful. She spent hours walking the gardens, reflecting on her past and the future she hoped to build. She reminded herself, why she was here, why she had made the difficult decision to marry Edward in the first place. It wasn't for her, it was for her family. The hope of lifting them out of poverty was what kept her going. Every moment of loneliness, every glance from Lucinda, every night spent alone in her room only fueled her determination. Hannah's strength was forged in the fires of adversity, and no amount of wealth or indifference could extinguish her resolve. In the quiet moments, when the house was still, Hannah would allow herself to dream. She imagined a future where her family no longer struggled, where her siblings could have the opportunities they deserved. This vision kept her moving forward, even when it seemed like all the odds were against her. No matter how difficult it became, she vowed that she would not let this life break her. Her perseverance would see her through, and one day, she hoped to prove that her decision to marry Edward was worth it not just for herself, but for the family she loved. Standing up against injustice, confronting Lucinda. As time passed, Hannah's sense of isolation grew, but so did her resolve to stand up for herself and her family. It wasn't just Lucinda's constant belittling that bothered her. It was the growing sense that something darker was at play. Lucinda, with her subtle manipulations and constant undermining of Hannah, had begun to reveal a more sinister side to her behavior. Hannah could feel that Lucinda was not just trying to control her in small ways, but was actively working to push her out of the family's inheritance. One evening, while walking through the estate's sprawling library, Hannah overheard a conversation that sent chills down her spine. Lucinda was talking to a man she had never seen before, a man whose name she learned was Rodrigo. The conversation was hushed, but there was no mistaking the urgency and veiled malice in Lucinda's tone. "She must leave," Lucinda said, her voice sharp. "If she stays, it will all fall apart. I have to make sure she doesn't get in my way." Hannah's heart raced as she listened from the shadows. She had always suspected that Lucinda's hostility went beyond simple jealousy or resentment, but hearing the words from her own lips confirmed it. Lucinda was scheming to remove her from the family, to push her out and take control of the estate and its wealth for herself. The realization hit Hannah like a punch to the stomach. She knew now that it wasn't just about insults and cold treatment. Lucinda was playing a dangerous game, and she was at the center of it. Hannah knew she could not let this stand. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let Lucinda tear it all away. With a newfound sense of clarity, she made a decision. She would confront Lucinda directly. The time had come to stand up for herself, for the life she had chosen, and for the future she was determined to create. The fear that had once held her back was now replaced with a fierce determination to protect everything she had worked for. The confrontation with Lucinda. The stakes are raised. The confrontation between Hannah and Lucinda was inevitable. Tensions had been building for weeks, and as Hannah gathered evidence of Lucinda's plans, she realized that a direct confrontation was the only way to stop her. Armed with the knowledge of Lucinda's machinations, Hannah summoned Lucinda to the library one afternoon. It was time to lay everything bare. As Lucinda entered the room, her expression was one of cold superiority, as if she already knew what was coming. "What is it now, Hannah?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But there was no mistaking the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes as she took in Hannah's determined stance. Hannah's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't waver. "I know what you've been planning," she said firmly. "I overheard your conversation with Rodrigo. I know that you've been plotting to remove me from the family and take control of everything that rightfully belongs to Edward and me." Lucinda's face went pale, and for the first time, she was caught off guard. Her usual composure slipped, and Hannah could see the flash of panic in her eyes. "You think I'm doing this for myself?" Lucinda sneered, her voice laced with venom. "I'm doing what's best for this family. Edward is weak, and you're nothing but an opportunist." Hannah stood her ground, her voice unwavering. "I didn't marry Edward for the wealth or the power. I did it to protect my family, to give them a future, and I won't let you destroy that." The intensity in her words was enough to silence Lucinda for a moment. "I may not have the power you do, Lucinda, but I will fight for what's mine. You will not take this family away from me." The room was thick with tension as Lucinda processed Hannah's words. Finally, she let out a harsh laugh, trying to regain her composure. You think you can win against me? You're nothing. You're just a poor girl who got lucky. But Hannah's resolve only strengthened. We'll see who is really lucky in the end. It was the first time in her life that Hannah truly felt in control. She knew the stakes were high, but for the first time, she was willing to fight for what was rightfully hers. The confrontation with Lucinda marked a turning point in Hannah's journey. She was no longer the passive participant in her life, but the active force that would shape her destiny. As the tension in the room lingered, both women knew that the game had changed. The power dynamic had shifted, and Hannah was no longer afraid to take what she had earned. The battle for the future of the estate, and for her place within it, had just begun. Overcoming adversity and triumph. Victory of love and integrity. Unmasking Lucinda's plot. Hannah's life had been turned upside down by the numerous challenges and manipulation she faced, but she had reached a turning point. The strain of living in a hostile environment had driven her to the edge, but her perseverance and integrity had begun to pay off. She no longer saw herself as a passive observer of her fate. Instead, she had grown into a woman determined to fight for what was right, and that meant confronting the darkness lurking within her own family. With her suspicions about Lucinda's true intentions confirmed, Hannah set out to gather evidence of her schemes. She knew she couldn't just confront Lucinda without backing up her claims, and she was determined to expose her for the manipulative, power-hungry person she had become. She had to do it without drawing too much attention, for Lucinda was clever and always on her guard. Hannah sought help from those she trusted, the loyal servants who had witnessed Lucinda's underhanded dealings. Together, they compiled the necessary proof, carefully documenting every conversation, every whisper of conspiracy. It wasn't long before the web of lies Lucinda had spun began to unravel. Hannah, armed with the truth, approached Edward. His reaction was one of initial disbelief. He had never imagined his beloved niece could be capable of such treachery. But the evidence was undeniable. As Edward processed the truth, his heart heavy with guilt for having been blind to the manipulations around him, he began to understand the depth of Lucinda's deceit. The confrontation between Lucinda and Edward was intense. The once protected family member was now exposed for her role in trying to seize control of the estate. Lucinda, once so sure of her position, tried to deflect blame, but there was no escaping the undeniable proof that Hannah had presented. She had been caught in her own lies, and Edward could no longer turn a blind eye. The final blow came when Edward disowned Lucinda, her claims to the inheritance completely invalidated. In the aftermath, Edward's relationship with Hannah began to change. His eyes were opened not just to the deceit of his niece, but also to the emotional isolation he had imposed upon Hannah. For the first time, he truly saw her, not as a means to protect his wealth, but as a woman who had endured so much for the good of their family. Slowly, the cold distance between them began to thaw. He apologized for his lack of attention, for not seeing the pain she had been carrying all along. They began to communicate more openly, and through this new understanding, the couple began to rebuild their relationship, step by step. It was a slow and uncertain process, but the foundation of trust was finally being laid. Freedom and happiness, achieving her dreams. With Lucinda's plot exposed and Edward's support finally earned, Hannah began to experience a profound sense of freedom she hadn't known before. The mansion, once a symbol of entrapment and cold luxury, started to feel like a place she could call home. It wasn't just the material comforts that mattered. It was the emotional safety and the newfound respect she received from Edward and the others in the household. The realization that she had triumphed over the adversity that had plagued her made the weight of the years of struggle worth it. Hannah had done what she had set out to do. She had ensured her family's future by securing the estate, and she had fought to protect her dignity and integrity. No longer would she be seen as an outsider or a pawn in someone else's game. What she hadn't expected, however, was the blossoming of love between herself and Edward. What had started as a marriage born out of necessity was slowly transforming into something real. Edward's feelings, long buried beneath the surface, began to emerge. He saw Hannah not just as the woman who had helped him secure his wealth, but as the woman who had fought for their family, whose strength and resilience had saved them all. Slowly, they began to rediscover one another, sharing moments of tenderness and laughter that had once been absent. Hannah's dreams of finding love, of truly connecting with her husband, were finally coming true. She felt a warmth in her heart that had long been missing. For the first time since her marriage, she allowed herself to feel the full extent of her happiness. It wasn't perfect, and there was still much work to be done, but she felt a peace she hadn't known before. Her family was safe, and for the first time in years, she could truly enjoy the life she had built. She had risen from the ashes of adversity, and she was finally experiencing the joy of living in a world that felt whole. Hannah's success in securing her family's future and finding love with Edward was the culmination of everything she had worked for. She had transcended the harshness of her past and created a new, better future not just for herself, but for everyone she loved. Love in the family, conquering the coldness within. In the final chapter of her journey, Hannah realized that her victory was not only over the external forces that had tried to tear her down, but also over the emotional distance within her own family. For all the wealth and status she had gained through her marriage, the most important triumph of all was the restoration of love and trust within her home. Edward, once distant and indifferent, had begun to show a genuine, caring side of himself. With the removal of Lucinda from the family picture and the trust they had begun to rebuild, their relationship started to deepen. Edward, now more attentive and open, slowly began to make amends for the years of neglect. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying to make things right, not just for himself, but for Hannah. In the beginning, there had been so much coldness between them, a result of years of misunderstanding and emotional neglect. But now, the quiet moments they spent together, sharing their hopes and fears, brought them closer. They laughed more, spoke more freely, and even began to enjoy the simple pleasures that had been absent in their lives for so long. For Hannah, this shift in their relationship was more meaningful than any material possession or wealth. To be seen, understood, and loved by Edward was something she had longed for, and now it was finally becoming a reality. She realized that this was the true reward for all her hardships, the love of her family, and the emotional connection she had fought so hard to create. In addition to her relationship with Edward, Hannah found that the household itself began to change. The servants, once distant and formal, now looked at her with respect and affection. The mansion, which had once felt cold and unwelcoming, now felt like a place of warmth and security. The love that had been absent for so long began to radiate through every corner of the house, from the kitchen to the gardens. Her family's transformation wasn't just about wealth, it was about healing the wounds that had kept them apart for so long. Hannah had fought for her family's future, not just in terms of money, but in terms of love and connection. This was the victory that mattered most to her. As the months passed, the family grew closer, not just because of the material wealth they now had, but because they had learned the true value of love, trust, and support. And for Hannah, that was the ultimate triumph. Overcoming the odds, defeating the forces that sought to tear her apart, and finally, finding the love and happiness she deserved. The conclusion: maturity. Hannah becomes a strong and confident woman. By the time Hannah stood at the threshold of a new chapter in her life, she was no longer the same girl who had entered Edward's world with a heart full of hope, fear, and uncertainty. The trials, tribulations, and emotional battles she had faced over the past few years had shaped her into a woman of incredible strength and confidence. The journey she had undertaken from a life marked by poverty and social stigma to a marriage that initially seemed like a sacrifice had transformed her into someone who understood her own worth and her place in the world. Hannah's growth was not just a result of the material wealth she had gained or the emotional comfort that had slowly emerged between her and Edward. It was a deeper transformation that came from within, a self-awareness that she had earned through perseverance, resilience, and unwavering integrity. In facing the challenges of her marriage, the hostility from Lucinda, and the harshness of her new environment, she had learned to trust herself and her instincts. Each obstacle had taught her something invaluable: how to stand her ground, how to protect what mattered most, and, most importantly, how to remain true to her values, even when it seemed like the world was against her. She had learned to navigate the complexities of her relationship with Edward, and their love had evolved from a cold arrangement into a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. Together, they had found a balance between their personal desires and their responsibilities, learning to communicate more openly and honestly. Edward, once emotionally distant and unaware of the depth of Hannah's struggles, had come to appreciate the strength and courage she brought into their relationship. He saw her not only as his wife, but as an equal, someone with whom he could share his hopes, fears, and dreams. In addition to her evolving relationship with Edward, Hannah had found a sense of self that had eluded her for so long. She was no longer defined by the expectations of others or by the limitations of her past. She had carved out her own identity, a woman who had the courage to make difficult choices, who had the strength to overcome adversity, and who had the confidence to pursue her own happiness. Her journey had not been easy, but it had shaped her into someone who could face any challenge with grace and determination. Hannah's transformation was visible to those around her as well. The once timid, unsure young woman had become a confident and capable woman, one who was no longer afraid to assert herself or stand up for what she believed in. She had earned the respect of her family, her staff, and even her community. The self-assurance she carried with her was not just a result of external success, but came from knowing that she had stayed true to herself through every trial. She had learned that true strength came from within, from her ability to remain grounded in her values and to rise above the challenges life had thrown her way. And as she looked out over the estate she had fought so hard to secure, she knew that she had truly become the woman she had always wanted to be. The lesson: a story of perseverance, love, and integrity. The story of Hannah's journey is not just about her personal transformation, but also about the power of perseverance, the strength of love, and the importance of integrity in overcoming life's most difficult challenges. Her story is a testament to the idea that no matter how insurmountable the obstacles may seem, there is always a way forward if you have the courage to keep fighting for what you believe in. At the heart of Hannah's story is the lesson that love, when it is genuine and nurtured, has the power to heal wounds and bridge divides. When Hannah first married Edward, there was no love between them, just a mutual need for survival. But as time passed, they both realized that love could grow even in the most unexpected places. Edward's transformation from a distant, indifferent husband to a loving, supportive partner mirrored Hannah's own growth. She had come into the marriage with the expectation that it would be a practical arrangement, but what she had found was something far more profound. The love they shared was not perfect. It took time, patience, and understanding, but it was real, and that made all the difference. Hannah's perseverance was another key element of her success. Throughout her journey, she faced countless moments of doubt, isolation, and frustration. There were times when she felt like giving up, times when the weight of her circumstances seemed too heavy to bear. But through it all, she never stopped fighting. She fought for her family, for her dignity, and for the life she knew she deserved. Every setback only fueled her determination to press on, to keep striving for a better future. Her integrity also played a vital role in her success. Throughout the twists and turns of her journey, Hannah never compromised her values. She could have chosen the easier path at any point, giving in to Lucinda's manipulations, retreating into her role as a passive wife, or sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of maintaining the status quo. But instead, she chose to do what was right, even when it was difficult. She chose to stand up for herself and for her family, to confront injustice head-on, and to fight for the future she believed in. Her unwavering commitment to integrity was what ultimately allowed her to emerge victorious. Hannah's story teaches us that perseverance is not just about enduring hardship, it's about actively seeking change and refusing to accept a life that doesn't align with your values. It's about finding strength in love, standing firm in your integrity, and never giving up, no matter how difficult the journey may seem. The final chapter, a new beginning. As Hannah's journey reached its final chapter, her life entered a new phase, one that was filled with promise, peace, and purpose. The struggles she had faced, the challenges she had overcome, and the relationships she had rebuilt had all led her to this moment. She was no longer just a part of Edward's family. She was an integral part of the future they were building together. The mansion, once a place of isolation and cold luxury, had become a home. It was a home filled with love, understanding, and respect, a place where Hannah had found her own place, not as an outsider, but as a partner and a valued member of the family. Edward had come to recognize the strength of her character and the depth of her love for him, and in turn, he had offered her the support and affection she had longed for. Together, they had created a new foundation for their relationship, one built on trust, communication, and mutual respect. But more than that, Hannah had learned to stand on her own 2 feet. She had discovered her own strength, her own voice, and her own ability to shape her destiny. She no longer relied on others to define her worth. She knew her own value. She had become the woman she had always dreamed of being: strong, confident, independent, and, most importantly, at peace with herself. The estate, once a symbol of her hardships, now represented the culmination of her dreams. It was a place where she could look forward to the future with hope and excitement. She had not only secured her family's future, but had also found a sense of belonging and love that she had never thought possible. Her journey had been long and difficult, but it had brought her to a place of fulfillment and joy. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and a mind focused on the future, Hannah embraced her new life. She had triumphed over adversity, rebuilt her relationships, and found the love and peace she had been seeking all along. As she looked out over the rolling hills of the estate, she knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter she was ready to write, one filled with promise, purpose, and happiness. Thank you so much for watching today's story. We hope you enjoyed this emotional and inspiring journey. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Stories TH for more amazing content. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more stories that inspire and entertain. See you in the next video.